generic or specific authority. So we've spent some time in our last classes talking about ways of establishing authority. This lesson will focus a little more on kinds of authority. I suppose we'll have to explain that just a little bit. But I would preface it with this, the idea that we probably don't even think about it, but we are familiar with communication in either generic or specific ways. It's something that we do and that we utilize probably every day. And it comes to us in many different forms. But again, it's something that we already know. God speaks to us in the same way. And something that we've tried to emphasize in this series of classes is that God speaks to us in human language. That is, he speaks to us in ways that we can understand. He hasn't spoken to us in some way that we have to decipher some code or in a way that only some can understand. But no, he speaks to us in a way that is common to us, in a way that we know and understand. Sometimes when God speaks to us, he's very specific about what he says. And when God is specific, that takes away from us judgments to be made, because God has made the judgments. But if God speaks to us in a more generic way, well, then there's some things we have to think about. We have to determine what is the best way to do what God would have us do. But again, when he is specific, our judgment is taken out of the picture. God has made judgment for us. So we spoke in the last couple of lessons about ways of establishing authority, that God tells us or that he shows us or he gives us enough information where he has implied to us what we need to do. This lesson focuses on two kinds of authority, generic or specific. But in either way, we need to understand that God is giving authority. He is speaking by authority. On the outline, to kind of define this a little bit. Generic authority allows us to do or include all methods or ways of doing something, to do what God has authorized. But specific authority limits our actions only to the things and the ways that God has specified. Now you read through those definitions and I still walk away going, now what's that? You know, that stuff kind of hurts my head. And so what we want to do in this class is we want to work through some applications. Some scriptures, all of them are familiar. Yes, we picked these out because they are so familiar. On one hand, we think like, man, couldn't we come up with something different? Well, in fact, we could have. But we went with some passages that are so familiar because we are trying to illustrate something that might be unfamiliar to some. So let's go to the book of Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6, the story of Noah. Now, we're not going to read all of the story of Noah and all of the reasons why God has spoken to him and why does God have him building the ark. No, we're not talking about all of that. We are looking specifically here at verses 14 through 16. Here is the instruction that God gave to Noah about building the ark. And what I hope we will see and understand is that God gave instruction, some that was specific and some that is generic. And let's see if we can pick that out. Here's the text, verse 14. So go make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 450 feet long and 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. Make a roof for it and finish the ark to within 18 inches of the top. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. We'll stop right there. And again, we're just trying to work through some application here. And now the question's for you. God told Noah to build an ark of gopher wood. This version says cypress wood. I've seen some that said acacia wood. So, I mean, what exactly is gopher wood? No, we're not going to discuss that. We don't know anymore.
But it meant something to Noah.
It meant something to Noah. We don't know exactly.
He had to go for it. That's right.
He had to go for it. We don't know what is meant by gopher wood or acacia wood, and it doesn't really matter. The point is, Noah knew what it was. It was something that was specified. And so God told Noah to build an ark of specific wood. Or, I just answered the question.
Yep, you did.
What kind of command is that? Specific, And so, why didn't God say, well, don't build it out of oak. Don't use maple. Don't use walnut. Don't use pine. Why didn't he say that? You didn't have to. When God specifies something, it takes out of the equation, it takes out of the picture anything else. So it excludes everything else. Okay, so what judgment did Noah have on the wood that was to be used? Zero. He had no judgment to make on what kind of wood. Comply or not was the only decision that he could really make on that. God specified obedience was required. And so if God had just said wood, he could have used whatever wood he wanted to use. But he didn't. God specified a kind of wood. So God specified the size and the design, the size of the ark. So what does that demand? What did Noah have to do? Did he have to make a drawing of how he wanted to design the ark? No.
He just had to measure and make sure the size was what God said it was to be.
To do what God said. Windows and doors, was that specific or generic? Specific. It just kills me. Every kid's book you pick up of Noah and the ark, there's like 14 windows and animals' heads poking out of every one. And it's kind of hard trying to give a disclaimer to a 3-year-old. It wasn't really like this, but there was one door and one window. God specified those things. What about the number of floors? Was that specific or generic? Specific again. God said, there's 3 floors. Why 3 floors? The answer would be, we don't know. We don't know why 3 floors. But in God's plan, this is what needed to be done. That's what he specified. Sometimes we don't need to think real hard when God specifies something about why. Whatever why we come up with is really not so important, because God has already specified something. How many rooms in the ark? It's generic. Were there rooms in the ark? Well, I presume so, to keep the animals separate.
There is at the one in Kentucky.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you go to creation of the ark there, of course there's rooms. And yes. And so that was generic. There was some decisions to be made. So what kind of tools did Noah use to build the ark? Whatever he needed. God didn't specify it.
Well, go back to the rooms, it does say in verse 14, you shall make an ark with compartments.
Yes.
But it doesn't specify
how many. Yeah, that. Right. Good clarification. I'm glad you said that. Yeah. Make compartments, make rooms, but doesn't say how many. So, did Noah use tools to build the ark?
Of course he did.
Presume so, but God didn't tell him how to do that, just to build the ark. I wonder if he had help.
You just said yourself.
What's that?
Make you
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think God was limiting Noah alone to do it.
Interesting, thought here. Did Noah build the ark by himself? I don't know that God specified, Noah, this is for you and you alone to build this ark. Who would he have used for help? Well, we always think of his sons. We presume his sons, but we don't really know, right?
Probably went out and found some carpenters.
Maybe so, So you see where we can start kind of dividing up some things that God specified and some things that, well, he didn't specify do this, and there was some judgment to be made. Let's go on to another familiar passage here.
Let me add this, though, real quick. I know this is a simple story about Noah and the ark and some of these things, but we're trying to just use this to illustrate that when we talk to each other, we speak in generic ways sometimes, we speak in specific ways at times. Noah didn't pick up a hammer and say, I wonder if it's authorized for me to use this. Of course it is. How else are you going to accomplish God's instruction, right? There are things that God said that Noah did not have any other judgment to make on. But then there are other generic things that God said to him that, of course, he could use his best judgment as to what's the best way to do this. And where we're going to go eventually is we do the same thing when it comes to things that we do as a church, things that we do in our religious life. There are specific things that we can't fudge on. We can't change those things. There are other things, though, that we've got some flexibility and liberty on figuring out how to do it, okay? So let's look at another example. Go to Matthew chapter 28. You were ready to go there, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. Matthew chapter 28. So there's several things that are mentioned here, and again, this is a very familiar passage. This is the Great Commission when Jesus ascends back up into heaven. And let's look at the instruction that he gives to the disciples before he does that. Matthew 28, look at verse 18. Jesus came up and spoke to them, saying, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth." We talked about that verse in our very first lesson and maybe our second one as well. Jesus is the authority. He has all authority, and now he is delegating authority to the apostles and giving them the Spirit and so forth, which we've already talked about. Now, here's the instruction he gives to them in verse 19. "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." All right, what is the first command that Jesus gives to the disciples here? Go. Okay, I want you to go and preach to all nations. Is that a generic or a specific instruction? Interesting. Okay, the word go, is that generic or specific? That's generic. Are they going to take a boat? Are they going to walk? Are they going to ride a camel? Are they going to ride a motorcycle? It doesn't matter. They just have to go. And whatever the best way of going is, that's what they need to do. Right?
Okay, so now wait a minute. See, I would say go is specific.
No. It's not. You're wrong about that. No, it's not.
See, I would say that's specific. How to go is generic.
Okay, don't listen to that, okay? It's a generic instruction. Go, all right? He doesn't say, go by camel and preach the gospel to every... That'd be different, wouldn't it? He says, go. Okay, so when Joe goes to Africa, he gets on a plane. Could he get on a boat? Yeah. Could he get on a raft? I mean, theoretically, yes. That'd be kind of silly. But he's going, okay? That's a generic instruction. There's a million ways one can go somewhere. So figure out what's most efficient and do it. Okay. Now, what's the next instruction he gives? Go make disciples of all the nations. And then he gives this specific instruction. Okay? Baptizing them. That's a part of God's plan. He could have said, go make disciples and here's how you do it. And he could have given them some other means of making disciples. But baptizing people in what? In the name of... You see, there's some specific things that are mentioned here, right? He talks about the authority of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's what that means. In the name of the Father, Son, with their authority. All authority has been given to me, and I am telling you, here's what you do. Go out and baptize these people. That's a very specific thing. The disciples knew what that meant. They understood what Jesus was telling them when they said that. He didn't say, go make disciples and make sure that everybody who becomes a follower has a special T-shirt that, declares that they are a follower. He could have said that, but he gave them a very specific instruction as to what they are to do.
So back up a little bit. In the second command to teach or to make disciples, I'm seeing that separate as baptized. I see that as the third command. The second command to go, depending on what version you're looking at, go, teach, or New King James says go, make disciples, which kind of helps to define the teaching. And so generic or specific to teach. Is that generic or specific to go teach?
What is being preached is the gospel.
What's being taught, okay?
Is open to.
Okay.
All right. How is it to be taught? What kind of teaching did the apostles do? Were they always preaching to large multitudes? No. Sometimes they taught in people's homes, and they taught one-on-one. And Ronnie?
Try to make this point forward. You two just illustrated it about all things.
Mm-hmm.
All things have things about them that are generic, and have things about them that are specific.
That's right.
It depends upon the question you ask about.
That's right.
So there's not just solely a generic command,
Mm-hmm.
or solely a specific command. Go involves both generic ideas
It does.
and specific ideas.
And then what about teach?
Same thing?
Same thing.
We're not teaching pottery classes.
That's right.
Right? We're not teaching
we
things
are
that are
to
unrelated.
teach is specific. How to teach is generic. So you see, there's actually both.
I think we're just confusing people now.
No. I think we're narrowing this down now. I think we had to back up. To teach what we are to teach. Can we just decide what we want to teach? No, God has specified what to teach. And in fact, in this passage, Ben started talking about this. He defines what is to be taught. But does he say how to do it?
Right.
He doesn't say how to do it.
Yeah, the apostles would utilize different methods of teaching. Sometimes it was public teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it was private teaching. It doesn't matter. Teaching is teaching.
We use
right?
different methods in teaching. I mean, it's the same thing. And even like, when you hear someone say, well, you're using that PowerPoint. What authority do you have to use a PowerPoint? It says, well, we're specified what we are to teach. How we are to teach it. He hasn't specified that. It's like Ben was talking about, like when we go. I think go is specific, but how do we go? Ben was illustrating, how do we go? There's different ways to go. To go out and teach. He talks about going to Africa. You're going to take a plane. I've always been afraid that the elders are going to say, go to Africa, here's a raft. That's sort of like saying, don't come back. So you see that we can see the specific and we can see the generic. Now there's some things where he's very, very specific. You start talking about, baptism. Some would think that that's generic. In the religious world, I'm not saying we would. In the religious world, some would think that's generic what baptism means. You need to go a little farther with that point. You were really on a good line on that. How do we know that that's specific?
You sure you don't want to go ahead and do it?
No.
Well, we know that there's a host of other New Testament scriptures about baptism and what that involves and what that does, right? So we look at that and we realize, okay, given a whole body of what Jesus says and the New Testament says, we know exactly what he's telling them when he gives this instruction in Matthew 28. We know the purpose of baptism and what it does, what it accomplishes, that it removes sins, that it identifies one with Christ and his death, and that it brings one up to new life. All of these New Testament passages come together, and now we look at this instruction and we say, that's why Jesus said, go do this. Go baptize people. Go do this. Here are the reasons why. Mm-hmm. He could have said anything about, well, here's how I want disciples to be made, and disciples are going to be marked by this, right? I mentioned the t-shirt thing. I know that's kind of silly, but my point is, Jesus could have said anything here. But why did he say, baptize people? Because when you go out and make disciples, that's how that begins. The New Testament teaches us that it begins with being baptized into Christ, and then you follow this course, this life of pursuing discipleship. Sarah?
I think the point you just said about he didn't have to say all that because he'd already shown them through this whole 3 years that they've been together how to do exactly what he was telling them to do. And he did it by showing them.
Sure.
So he didn't have to say, well, do this, 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 and this, and give them a whole laundry list of, standard operating procedures for how to make disciples. He'd already shown them how to do it. So he said, go do it. And we can use the New Testament to show us how to do the same.
And ways, I'm sorry.
Wayne?
Yes, my version of the Bible says make disciples. You both have been talking, using the word teach rather significantly. I think you may be going here with this, but I think making a disciple and teaching someone is rather dramatically different. Most of us talk about math and in high school we learn how to do algebra, we were taught algebra, but we never used it. Making disciples, though, identifies the process of identifying other people who know everything that the disciples know, and then they go forward and teach others.
But how do you make disciples?
Well, you have to start by teaching.
Okay. Right.
So,
Alone is not what he told them to do. He told them to make disciples.
But how do you do that? But you do that by teaching, right?
teaching.
It's,
That's it.
yeah.
It does. Yeah. That
Right.
sort of defines what the teaching is and narrows what the teaching is about. It was like I was saying, when the New King James Version says, make disciples, which sort of helps define a little bit what teaching is. But if you have a version that just says teach, and you're wondering, well, what does that mean? What does it imply? Well, the next phrase, baptizing them, well, that defines what you are teaching them, is how that is. And a side point, Ben, we started talking about this about how to go about teaching. And someone mentioned, we look at the life of Jesus and how he taught, and he utilized different ways or methods. Remember when he was scratching in the sand, drawing in the sand, illustrating? And Jesus taught by parables so often, where he would teach and make application to what he was saying. I feel so strongly, preaching without application is not preaching, because Jesus did that so much. You remember when Paul, is it Acts 27-28, when Paul was in the Temple Mount and the mob was there, and he wanted to address the mob, and how he got up on the stairs above everybody so he could speak to the crowd.
It's 22.
Or 20, yeah, okay. Maybe it just illustrates again, there are different ways of addressing a crowd when you're trying to teach. But again, all of those points are kind of generic, that there are different ways to go about teaching. What we are teaching is specific, but how we go about it is generic. And then there's some hands here. Joe and then Jimmy and then Glenn.
It's kind of obvious to all of us in here, but being raised Catholic, the way to make disciples is to baptize babies. Not been taught. Not been a decision. And so it's kind of been perverted
Yeah.
to, we'll make them disciples just by baptizing.
Right.
Teaching,
Takes teaching out of it. Yeah.
later.
And so you see, like, in the pattern of what they would teach and do is just counter to what this
But also,
instruction
I
would
think
be.
catechizing would have a large part in that too, right? And I think that's something that, and what I mean by that is simply drilling in information into a young mind. I think that's actually a really good thing. Obviously, we don't want to catechize their doctrines, but the principle of drilling knowledge into a young mind is really good.
Jimmy?
I was just going to say, to your point, the King James Version does say, "Go ye therefore and teach all
Teach,
nations."
yeah. Glenn, do you have a comment? Or no? Or Bryce? Okay.
Well, what Paul says later on that shows us something about that generic, where he says, I become all things to all men, that by any means I might save some.
Right.
So when we have this kind of freedom to choose something, we kind of talk about what's most efficient, and Paul's just saying, whatever I can do, it doesn't, all these different ways, there's so many different ways to teach, to make disciples. I'm going to do what's the most effective, the way that I can save them.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay. We got a lot left. We got to keep
I know
moving.
it. I
We
know
spent
it.
way too long on this.
Oh, but we had to back up. I thought we were starting to get a little confused on some of that. Baptize, you made some really good points about this. I mean, baptize is for a specific purpose and reason, for the remission of sins. Mark's account of this, chapter 16, says that. And then somebody said, well, there's so many other passages that define for us what baptism into Christ is, and that's true. But where we baptize somebody, that's not specified. In a baptistry, in a creek, in a lake, in a pool. You see, so there is the specific of what baptism is. There's the generic about how do we actually go about doing it. And we see that. And then the last point on this illustration, and we don't have as much to say about that, to teach them to observe all things. We would make some of the same points on that, probably, I guess. Hebrews chapter 10. And we'll just touch down here for a moment, because in the next lesson there's some more application or points that I think we are going to make. But in Hebrews in chapter 10, it was again one of those familiar passages, but just quickly some specific and generics that maybe come out of this Hebrews chapter 10. We're going to start at verse 23. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. Let us consider one another so as to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. And so we might look at the passage and kind of see a focal point here of not forsaking the assembly. Seems to kind of be a focal point. He kind of ramped up to that in the previous verses. And the question, I don't know, I'm not sure. I guess I would just say, is that specific? Not forsaking the assembly. Is that specific or is that generic? There's something specific here. God is command, do not forsake the assembling of ourselves. But there are probably some generics that have to come out of this, as well. What are some reasons given for this assembling of the saints? Okay, God said so. We already got that point. In the passage, what are some reasons for this assembling of the saints?
Hold fast the confession.
Hold fast. Okay, to hold fast the confession. What else? Encouraging one another. Consider one another. To stir up love and good works. To exhort. So sometimes we get so caught up on do not forsaking, we don't think about why we are not to forsake. And that's very important. But now, to take it a little bit further, I just want to introduce this. We're not going to talk about it because we're going to talk about it more in the next class. But are there some things unspoken or not specified? Well, yeah, doesn't tell us where to meet. It doesn't say that we have to have a specific place to meet. So that'll be some discussion, I think, coming up maybe in the next class, just seeding that just a little bit. Anything else on that point, Ben? You think we need to?
No, I think we have an instruction, meet together, but that specific element of where is unspoken. So we're going to deal with that a little bit in the next class when we talk about silence and talk about what options are available.
Just want us to be thinking on that a little bit.
All right, another one. Let's just think about because I think we're quickly running out of time. Let's think about
We've already read these passages several times.
Let's think about the Lord's Supper. We looked on Wednesday about some of the specific things, right? Bread and a cup, that's specific. We can't change that. First day of the week, that's specific. We can't change that. But is there some generic instruction about the first day of the week? The time. Yeah. Morning, afternoon, evening, does it matter? No. It's first day of the week. So figure out a time that works, a time that's convenient, and let's all meet together at that time. Okay?
And also the location.
Yeah, all right, the location as well. So the specifics of first day of the week, that eliminates every other day of the week. The specifics of the bread and the cup eliminates other options, but the time of the day is something that could be changed. Well, should we do the Lord's Supper first in the service, or do we do it last? Or does it matter? No. It just matters that we do it together on the first day of the week. That's the instruction.
And you know, to us, to many of us, all of this sounds like, yeah, we know this, You know, why are we spending time on this? But when you sit down and you talk with somebody unfamiliar with what Scripture says on these things, it's rather interesting how often you have to explain these very points because they have no idea, no concept. I mean, the church they go to, they can go on Saturday night and have their Lord's Supper, and they think nothing about that. Or if they have some kind of special revival, and in some cases they might have a special occasion on Tuesday night of the Lord's Supper, and would ask no questions about that. And so what seems to so many of us who might be well versed in these things to be like, yeah, we all get this. No, everyone does not get this. And we need to understand it in such a way that we can go to these passages and explain it to someone.
All right, you want to hit the last one?
Yeah, we got time, and we wanted to get to this last point here.
We need to read these.
We do.
We haven't read these passages yet.
Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. Not unfamiliar, but just to let's put these passages in our mind before we start to discuss them. Ephesians 5, verse 19, we're stepping kind of in the middle here of something, but we know where we're going with this. Speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3, verse 16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Now, we may spend some time in a later lesson on some more discussion about some of these points, but just some quick observations for us to think about. So, do we see here any specific commands? Sing. And that's a specific that is given here. What else do we see? Specific? The type of song, psalms, hymns, spiritual songs. Specific. What else might we see as a specific? Joe? The spirit in which we sing. Okay? What else? To whom we sing. We sing to the Lord, and we sing to one another. So yeah, there are some specifics here. Okay, what about generics? Are there some generic commands here? How many songs to sing? Well, what's our song service going to look like? Well, of course, you know what you have to have. You have to have 2 songs and a prayer, a song and the Lord's Supper, right? But we don't do that here that way, right?
Not 2 songs.
Yeah. But sometimes that becomes very specific to some churches, an order of worship, or how many songs to sing. That's not specified.
Joe, I would also say these 2 commands are not limited to our Sunday gathering.
It's true. I think that's very right. I think that's true. In the manner in which we would sing when we just get together in someone's home to sing. Some of these same things we need to apply, in how we are singing. So what is not authorized when we look at these passages? Playing instruments. Playing is not authorized. What is specified is singing. What we do not see is playing of instruments. And so here's,
Yeah, but when the instrument's being played, I am still singing.
oh, yeah,
I've
that's
heard
true.
that one,
I've
right?
heard that, you're right.
But when the playing is going on, I'm still singing. I'm still meeting the command. What would you say to that?
Mm-hmm.
How would you respond to that?
The person playing the instrument is not able to sing and admonish each other. They're worried about them playing the instrument and their notes and
Okay, I think that's kind of a practical, maybe, consideration of it. But I suppose a good musician could do both, right? Somebody who was really trained and skilled could do both. All right, Jimmy and Joe.
I've always thought if the commandment to sing is a commandment to all.
Yes.
If playing involves that as well, then we should all.
Then everybody should be playing too. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, Joe?
I think it depends on if they think it's required to have an instrument or not. Because how would you have an instrument, if it's required, how would you do that in a bush in Africa? I guess you could.
Yeah, I don't think they would say it's required. I think they would say it's a preference, it's optional. So let's think about this. If these two things, singing and playing, can be done independently of one another, and each is its own category of kind or topic, if each one is a standalone thing, then they can't be the same, right? Can you sing without playing? Can you play an instrument without singing? Yes, you can. All right, if you couldn't, if they had to go together, then this would be a different discussion. You can sing without playing. So when the scripture here says sing, why then would it authorize something that is inherently, entirely different, which is playing? Does that make sense? Okay, I wish I had some more time to talk about that.
But
Maybe we have to hold that
we
there.
We will.
But intrinsically, it is a different activity
It is.
altogether.
It is. More time would need to be spent on that. All right, lesson number 8 is in the hallway. Make sure you pick that up. Silence in the Scripture. Thank you for being here.